This is for the leaders, the visionaries, the hope bringers, kindness instigators. This is your place to get loved, poured into, activated, and inspired. I am sitting outside with the sweet fur baby Honey. You may hear her barking. She loves to bark at squirrels and walkers. You might hear some ambient traffic passing by as well. We're kind of close to the road. And there she goes. She is going to defend us from that cement truck that just passed by. But I really am seeking to be more in action when I'm having ideas or thoughts instead of waiting for a better moment, and just being present with what is. And I've known for the last couple years that I am supposed to be sharing more about my own spiritual journey. And I've been doing that in different ways, but it feels like this is really something that's supposed to take the center stage of my work, and something I just need to start unpacking a little bit more. And I'm in a place, I think, now where I can give more language to that. For many years, it was still finding form in me. And I was struck by this thought this morning, actually. A few years ago, I took something called a career direct assessment. And my facilitator, who was going over my results with me, basically got to a point in when she's basically explaining to me how I tested and what my results mean. And she came to this part of one of the sections where you answer true or false to statements. And she said, "Evelyn, just want to stop you right here." She was like, "You said true to like 14 out of 16 statements." She was like, "Most people say true to, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6. She said, "What this tells me is that you're here to go first, and you're here to go through brick walls." And, I guess I heard this like in my early 20s and thought to myself, well, that sounds fun. Who wants to hear you're made to go through a brick wall? Okay, it sounds like a compliment, but it also sounds really painful, doesn't it? And I didn't really know what that was going to mean. I wasn't a stranger to be an advocate for people, or fighting for things or speaking truth in ways that I thought truth needed to be spoken to power, or in dynamics with my friendship. Sometimes I had to learn how to do that differently, and also to wait for an invitation. Sometimes too, I had to learn that, but I digress. So going through a brick wall. And as I've been working on writing the book, that is going to, I believe, unpack more of the spiritual journey and also be an extension of how my relationship with my dad has changed and evolved since his own transition back into just pure love and energy, and crossing a different threshold that we have to answer a question around. It's going to contain parts of that, but it's also really made me think about maybe the walls I'm going to break through and come up against were actually the walls that have built the church. And at the time too, I wouldn't have known that. I wouldn't have really deciphered that. It's never been a plan of mine to feel like I was going to contend or come up against the very theology that I grew up inside. And what's interesting is this also occurred to me yesterday when I was thinking and talking with someone in a post that I had shared, and I was engaging with someone on that post who basically said, "I'm sad to read that you believe this," and it really gave me some permission to really sit with, do I feel sad that my beliefs have changed? Do I feel sad about what I believe to be true? And the answer is no. And this was in regards to, there was an ex-mega church pastor who had shared a response to someone who was kind of wrestling with a verse in John, which is where Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And the person was approaching this former evangelical pastor with this question saying, I don't really agree with this text anymore, but I'm not really sure how to understand and live with it. And so he was engaging with it and basically explaining that Jesus's words were less about a handshake, a secret something that you needed to know to be in, and more about how you were living your life. And that is what Jesus modeled in his, loving those who society says were other, sitting with people who feel misunderstood or who are misunderstood, and then also calling out people who claim to know God and speak his laws, yet don't really make space or show God in how they entertain and interact with the world. And so I loved his response. I loved how he unpacked it. His name is Jim Palmer, if you ever want to check out him or his work. And I really appreciate how he engages the scriptures and the way that he has found a home, not a home, but a way to translate how he feels and interprets those texts now that he's left kind of that evangelical bubble. And I find myself in a similar situation where I feel like I am supposed to be sharing more and more about what that has meant to me to change from a trajectory of church leadership and thinking I might lead the church in the context that I grew up around, to understanding that I am here to lead a kind of movement, a kind of revolution, a kind of way of love and being in the world, but it looks different than how my dad and my parents did that, but not so differently. It really all comes back to language. And I feel like what I started to say when I was engaging with that post and responding to the woman who said, this makes me sad that this is what you believe. It's so interesting because I think there for a season and a time when I was deconstructing, I felt a lot of shame and grief around not belonging to the church in the way that I understood it anymore. And so there was a part of me that felt like, well, I actually don't belong to this. This isn't mine anymore. And part of that's true. But the other part is that actually, really and truly, my deconstruction was part and is part of my faith journey. I am still on a faith journey. I think to live a life of being in connection with the divine will actually ask us to continue engaging our spirit and our soul until we transition back into just pure energy and love. Because I am also in a place where I no longer believe in heaven and hell as places that our soul will reside, but actually things that we experience. And I think we can experience heaven and hell in how we live our lives every single day. And I think that Jesus is the model, or is a model, for how to live in unity with divinity, with God, to live a life that looks like an expansive invitation into more. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is when Jesus says, I think it's John 10:10, I came that they would have life and that they would have it to the full. And the reality is that if Christians were really living out the gospel, were really living the way that Jesus modeled to love one another as they love themselves, to love their neighbor, to pray for those that they're persecuted by, and to walk with humility and work in mercy, that the world we live in right now would look radically different. It would have to. Because Jesus moved towards people in relationship. He never asked for them to fall into religious order, structure, and dogma. And in fact, most of his ministry was debunking the dogma that people lived inside. And so, I wanted to come in here and say, I am going to be sharing some more of this journey in different ways. But one of the things that I did in pursuit of this book was to actually ask some friends of mine to come and interview me and give me some space to talk about myself and my journey as a way to see if there were themes that came forward or consistent messages that I was longing to bring, because the reality is that I have always had a lot I could write about and do write about, but where my soul wants to be in this moment, in this context, has been a journey of creative coexisting and co-creating and understanding what that looks like. It's a living, breathing thing. It has its own presence. And so I feel like I'm just stewarding a book at this point, and asking what that gets to look like. But a large part of it, I feel, is meant to wrap its arms around the journey that I've been on, through grief and through my own deconstruction, and now also my own reclamation of what life looks like in my own spiritual practices, outside of something that someone has taught me, but instead inside of what I'm living. And I think that one of the things I really also want to say is that so many good building blocks came for me out of being inside of the church, learning about Jesus and his ministry. And every single time that I feel like I've interacted with any of the red letter words, they have something for me. And I think that one of the things too that I have really looked at the context of too is really that I want to see the lens of the Bible and everything else pass through what Jesus says, not the other way around. And I think that's again where we get into some differences, where you will see other pastors or other spiritual leaders or teachers. They're going to often be leading you through the lens of Paul and other books of the Bible, and they have their place. But if we are going to hang a hat on Christianity, on Jesus, on him being the way, the truth, and the life, and the living embodiment of God in the world, then I would think that our attunement comes to him first, and everything else falls from that lens. Anything else feels like a deviation and a manipulation, quite honestly. And also, do I believe that Jesus's words have been manipulated or changed over time? I do. I think that we've added language over the years, or that people in power have added language or interpreted or misinterpreted or added lenses into the Bible that never existed, and they only exist now as ways to, again, keep and maintain power. And the other thing that I wanted to offer here before I peace out, honey, it's okay. Psst, psst. That your spiritual journey is often going to be full of questions. And a lot of times I feel like the messages that we've received growing up is that you can't trust yourself, but you can trust the person in front of the room, the person at the leader board, the CEO, the president, whoever it is. And another thing that I feel like I'm here to stir within all of us is to recognize that model of patriarchy, which points us to hierarchy, has led us to some really, really bad practices of looking at the world as a way and a means to an end instead of a destination itself. And I really do think that we are on a journey to recover, reclaim, and also dismantle and reimagine what is possible for the world and different kinds and contexts of leadership. And we can always be in our choice of who we are putting ourselves under the leadership of. And so if you are a believer of Jesus, I would ask, are you placing yourself under his leadership, or through the context of lens of another person interpreting his leadership? And that includes me. because I never, ever have sought to be an authority that people point to and say, well, Evelyn holds this to be true, and that's why I think it's true. That's flattering. It's nice. But really what I want for you and for anyone listening here is that you would point to what you believe because you've lived it, you've experienced it, you lived in the expanse of it, or you have learned that the contraction of the fear, scarcity, or dogma that you were inside of didn't quite fit your soul, that you weren't meant to live in the box of dogma, of religious rules and hierarchy. You are meant to exist more in circle, in connection, in partnership, in collaboration. And so while it's nice to have people that we admire pouring into us and giving us insight that they've gleaned, it's also really, really important that we develop a way to understand when we feel like we're living in truth and when we're not, and when the truth is being shared and when it's not. And the way that I encourage people to start engaging with that, if that feels new or foreign or different, is to start paying attention to your body. Do you feel when you're listening to someone like you are safe, like you can expand, like they are asking you to expand? Does your body feel like it's safe? If that's the case, it's probably a good space that you're in. If your body, however, feels tight, like you are sitting in a space where you couldn't be honest about who you are, the questions that you have, or you feel like the person that's in front of you is using language that feels isolating or makes you feel tight or small, that's probably an indication that that's not truth. And you are reacting and responding to that. So I know it feels kind of interesting to entertain, but even noticing, do I feel expansive around my partner, my family, my work? Or do I feel small, tight, and contracted? Because I think these bodies and these vessels of ours are also part of how we are created to experience this life. And so when we are feeling tight, constricted, scared, those kinds of things, it is our responsibility to nurture those things within ourselves, to make sure that we are in safe places that feel good to us. And that doesn't mean that truth will always feel comfortable. Sometimes it's still going to feel abrasive and a little challenging. And it might want you might have to take a step back and go like, is that really what I'm gleaning from this? Because that feels different from what my family of origin said, from what my pastor said, from what my culture has taught me. And that's the other thing too, is that we live inside of such a toxic culture. At least in the Western world, I can't speak for everywhere else. But from what I see in America is that we have prioritized so much profit over people and also corporation over community. And that is something that we have to address. And that's something that we address each and every day with our choices of how to spend our time, where to invest our energy, and also who to follow or to align under and with. So anyway, I wanted to share here in this space before I share those interviews, just kind of unpacking a little bit more about what you'll hear and what you'll experience. And again, just where I found myself thinking about busting through brick walls. And like I said, I never expected them to be stained glass windows and cathedrals. But here we are. And again, I still have so much reverence and respect for people who do feel a devout sense of faith and connection to the church and to a higher order in the way that they've been taught. I respect that for you and your journey, and I love that for you and your journey. I just feel like I'm in a different space, and it's okay too if we part ways here. That's okay. I want you to live an expanded, full life. And I may not feel like a safe voice anymore as I continue to share. And that's okay. I don't take your departure personally. I want you to do exactly what feels like it's going to be the most life-giving for you. So I'm sending you all with love and so much gratitude to be in this space with you.